The station floated in silence above the dying star, its surface lit with an eternal orange glow that shimmered through its massive viewport's metal corridors stretched like veins across the structure, pulsing with energy and whispers from beings who had never before stood under the same roof in any corner of the galaxy. Humans and otherworldly creatures walked side by side. Their purposes often veiled their intentions even more, so Ray moved through this central control wing, quietly unnoticed. As usual, he preferred it that way. He was not like the others who relied on screens to scan readouts and track anomalies. He was different, and not because he wanted to be, but because something in his mind was wired to feel energy instead of simply observe it. Most of his co-workers thought of him as a gifted sensor technician, and nothing more. But the truth was far more complicated. He could sense patterns, movements, heat changes, and pressure shifts around him without needing a single piece of tech. For most of his life, this made him isolated. He saw things no one else did, shadows where none should exist, echoes in silent rooms. His mind never stopped reading the world around him like a living map, and though he had grown used to ignoring most of it, something changed on the fourth cycle of the summit. That morning he entered the station's observation room where negotiations were scheduled between human delegates and a species known as the Varnai, a race wrapped in mystery and mist. Known for their cloaking technology and silent traditions, the room was wide, filled with polished black floors, smooth walls that bent sound, and panels showing the burning star outside. Ray settled into his station. His nerves began to tingle. A faint pulse like wind moving through metal hummed through his body. Closed his eyes, ignoring the voice of his supervisor crackling through the comms. He tuned into the pattern. And then he saw it in his mind, not with his eyes. A shape moved in the space beside the Varnay envoy. It glided almost weightless, but it had purpose. Its steps were careful, its movements tight, deliberate, and controlled, as if trained for stealth. Ray opened his eyes. The figure was gone, or rather it had never been there for anyone else. Only he had noticed that something unseen had entered the chamber, unnoticed by the guards, unnoticed by the cameras, and even unnoticed by the sensors themselves, but not by him. He said nothing. Instead, he followed with his thoughts, tracing every motion in his mind, mapping where she was, how she moved. The cloak she wore must have been crafted with incredible precision, bending light and masking energy, but even that could not fool Ray's strange mind. He did not know yet who she was, but he knew without question she was there, and she was watching. For 3 more cycles the pattern continued. During the long discussions, the hidden figure returned, slipping into rooms just minutes before meetings began, lingering along the shadows near the delegation halls, never touching anything, never speaking, never disturbing, but always present, always precise. Her presence was sharp like a needle passing through cloth. She left no trace, no sound, no heat, but Ray felt her, and he knew she was not there for peace. Still, he kept it to himself. He watched and learned, even going so far as to fake system malfunctions, so he could stay after hours alone studying the pattern. Her trail was like a ghost's, one moment on the upper decks, the next inside the docking bay. He never saw her face, not even a flicker of her outline, but somehow she felt young, not in age, but in spirit, and yet filled with determination and urgency. It was during one of these silent shifts when Ray finally caught more than movement, a flicker of her footstep, just as she turned near the propulsion control. She was faster than he expected, and as soon as she felt herself being noticed, she vanished again. No sound, no panic, only gone. And in that moment, he smiled, not out of triumph, but curiosity. For the first time someone had noticed. He could see Ray sat at the edge of the catwalk, high above the station's fusion spine, staring at the pipes as energy surged through them like lightning. His thoughts weren't on the mission logs or the diplomatic scripts being passed from one system to another. His thoughts were on her, the invisible guest, who kept returning as if searching for something or someone. And he began to wonder what drove her to risk everything by being here. Later in the maintenance wing, he pretended to check pressure valves, but his attention was focused on the air, on the soundless breeze that passed just slightly out of rhythm. Like before, she was closer than ever before, and he could almost hear her breath, Though faint and filtered, it was not machine-made, not artificial. It carried emotion, curiosity, maybe even fear, and then it faded again, leaving him alone once more with only questions he thought about informing. Command telling them that a cloaked infiltrator had slipped into their summit, but a voice inside him urged silence. Something about her presence was different. It was not malicious. It was not hostile. She was watching, yes, but she was not attacking. Not planting bombs or hacking systems. She was learning, searching, walking carefully as though desperate for something he did not understand. So Ray made a decision not based on duty, but instinct. He would watch, but not report. He would learn before judging, and if she returned again, he would be ready, not with weapons or alarms, but with eyes wide open. The station above the dying star spun slowly into the night side, casting long shadows over the curved metal floors, and somewhere within those shadows, unseen by anyone else, but one, a figure moved in silence, unaware that her cover had already been broken by the only human who could truly see her. Lyra moved through the silent hallways of the space station with the same precision she had trained for since childhood, her body wrapped in the latest phase cloak suit created by her people for missions that demanded complete invisibility. Her steps were calculated, her breath steady, her thoughts focused, yet every time she returned from her silent rounds, a strange feeling lingered in the back of her mind, something subtle yet unsettling, a presence she could not quite name, but could not ignore either. People, the shiver, did not believe in direct confrontation. They believed in knowledge and shadows, in knowing more than the enemy before ever speaking a word. That was why Lyra had been sent to this summit, to observe, to listen, to understand the humans, not just their words, but their true nature, because the leaders of her world suspected that the humans were hiding something dangerous, something that could shift the balance of power across the stars. She had arrived cloaked as planned, bypassed the scans, and positioned herself near the central command nodes and diplomatic chambers, always watching, always recording every detail of their discussions. Every change in voice tone, every flick of an eye, every moment when a delegate hesitated or lied. Her equipment stored thousands of recordings, but she knew the real data came from instinct, from reading the air, from breathing in a room, until she understood it. And yet lately something had shifted. She began to notice changes in her trail, things she had not left behind, yet appeared as if someone were brushing past her path after she had gone, as if someone was following from a distance, not close enough to trigger alarms, but close enough to unsettle her internal balance. She started to question her own steps, checking and rechecking her logs, reviewing the thermal map left behind by her movements, but the systems showed nothing. No one should be able to detect her, not while the cloak was active. Not even the best human technology could see her. Still, the unease grew. One cycle she passed through the upper reactor hallway, which was rarely used by humans, except for rare maintenance shifts. But just as she turned past the column, she felt it again. Not a sound, not a visual trace, but something like a presence, something watching, something knowing. And for the first time since arriving, she hesitated mid-step. Her balance flickered. Her breath caught her cloak, adjusted its phase ever so slightly, reacting to the sudden spike in her heart rate. She vanished into the dark ceiling tunnels above, holding her breath, listening to the space below. And that was when she heard it, the quiet sound of someone moving across the floor without weight, without noise, but with full awareness. And her instincts screamed it was not a machine, not a patrol drone, not a random technician. It was a person moving with purpose, following a path too close to hers. Later, in her hidden rest chamber, she sat cross-legged, her visor laid beside her, her fingers moving over the glowing data tablet, rechecking the encounter. She could not make sense of it. Humans were supposed to rely on scanners, on visuals and audio feeds, but this one, whoever he was, had followed her path as though he had drawn it from memory, not machine logs. His movement had matched hers, step for step, even before she turned corners, even before she crossed certain thresholds. She leaned back against the cool wall, her eyes staring at the ceiling, and for a moment doubt crept into her mind. Had she made a mistake? Had someone discovered her presence? Was her mission Already compromised, but no alarms had sounded, no patrols had chased her, no official warnings had been sent through the summit channels, and her own sensors confirmed that she remained undetected by the system itself. It meant one thing: the person who had noticed her was acting alone, someone who saw what others could not and chose not to reveal. It's someone who watched but stayed quiet, and the idea puzzled her. It did not match the image she had learned of humans. She had been told they were impulsive, reactive, quick to judge and quick to attack, yet this one had done none of that. Instead, he had left behind small signs, signals that could be noticed only by someone like her: a tiny shift in events rotation, a discarded tool that pointed toward the next hallway, a flicker of light on a panel that she always passed but never touched. They were not random, they were messages meant to be understood silently, and the realization hit her with weight. This human was not just following, he was communicating. The next cycle, she made her way to the atmospheric regulation deck, which was known for its dense network of metal supports and winding pipes. It was one of the few places in the station where noise echoed in strange ways and visuals distorted from the constant steam flow. She waited there, standing in silence with her cloak still active, knowing full well that if he was following her, then this would be the place. He would show himself. She remained still for 20 minutes, listening to the machines breathe, and then she felt it again, that same awareness, that same quiet hum that brushed past her senses like wind. She did not move. She let the moment pass, and then a single whisper rose through the steam. Not words, not a voice, but a soft rhythm made by human footsteps, echoing in a pattern that matched the one she had used 3 cycles ago when tracing her route through the docking wing. She turned off the cloak just for a moment, just long enough to let him see her, and what she saw shocked her more than the risk. He stood not far from her, not with fear or aggression, but with calm, observant eyes that saw her not through sensors or cameras, but through instinct, through something deeper than machines could understand. He did not move toward her, he only nodded once, then turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the mist, unsure of everything she had believed until that moment. She stayed there longer than planned, the quiet of the room surrounding her, heart beating faster than before. Her mission was clear, her people had given her orders. But now, for the first time since she had stepped aboard this strange station, she was no longer sure if the enemy she had come to observe was truly her enemy at all. Next time Lyra entered the old cargo wing, she was no longer trying to hide from him. She still wore the cloak, but left it half-active, flickering every few seconds, as if unsure whether to vanish or remain visible. Her mind was no longer fully focused on the mission. Her thoughts kept circling back to the moment she had seen him, to the way he had looked at her, not with fear, not with anger, but with quiet understanding, as if he had been waiting for her. All along, Ray had returned to his regular duties, but his thoughts were far from routine. He kept sensing the same energy patterns, the same delicate movement passing through the metal veins of the station. He knew she was near even when others could not feel a thing. Her presence was like a quiet rhythm in a room that most could not hear, but he could, and with each passing cycle it grew clearer, more familiar, more connected to his own flow of thought. He knew she was not like the others. She did not carry weapons, she did not hack systems or plant traps. She simply moved, listened, watched, searched. Her energy never spiked with panic or aggression, only with something deeper, a sense of urgency, a feeling of loss that he could not explain until the moment came when they met again, not by accident, but by quiet design. Ray entered the maintenance chamber on Deck 12 knowing she would be there. The lights were dim, the hum of machinery echoed in the distance. Steam hissed from broken pipes, and the room felt more alive than ever, as if waiting for something to happen. He stood still, hands by his sides, making no sudden movements, his breath calm, his mind focused slowly. The air shimmered near the far wall, the flickering light twisted and bent, and then she appeared just like before, her tall figure standing still, her skin a soft shade of silver blue, her eyes glowing faintly with violet light. Her cloak slid off her shoulders and fell silent to the floor. No words were spoken at first, only silence, heavy but not tense, filled with curiosity, filled with quiet questions waiting to be asked. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes fixed on his face, watching for any sign of deception. But there was none, only calm, steady presence. She spoke first, her voice soft but clear, asking how he could see her, how he had known where she would be. Ray answered with simple honesty. He told her about his condition, how he could sense energy shifts around him, how patterns in the air and motion in space revealed things others could not see. He told her it was not a skill he had trained for, it was just the way his mind worked, and he had lived with it all his life. She listened carefully, her expression unreadable at first, but her gaze softened as he continued. She began to understand that he was not just another human technician, not just a guard or a spy. He was something else, someone who had always lived on the edge of understanding, someone who saw things others ignored because he could not help it. When she spoke again, her voice carried something new, not just caution but emotion. She told him her real purpose on the station. She said she had come not to harm, not to steal, not to spy for war, but to find someone. Her brother had gone missing during a conflict near a human outpost 2 cycles ago, taken or lost. No one knew the truth, and her leaders believed he was dead, but she believed otherwise, and when she traced the last known signal, it led her here to the station. Ray listened without interruption, his thoughts racing as pieces of the mystery began to fall into place. The movement, the repeated visits, the way she searched, the way her presence was never violent, only desperate. Now it all made sense. She had come here with a mission, not of war, but of family, of hope, and he knew then that he could not stand by and let her face this alone. They spent the next few cycles in secret meetings, hidden corners of the station, where no one went, silent places where echoes of machinery masked their voices. They exchanged information, comparing signals, checking records. She shared fragments of alien data. He translated it into human formats. They worked together, slowly building a path that led deeper into the systems of the station. As they uncovered more details, they found hints of something darker, a hidden operation buried in a layer of command files that were marked restricted to high-clearance users. There were reports of unidentified prisoners moved through temporary holding bays just before the summit began. Files showed evidence of transport logs matching the description of the ship her brother had last been seen on, but the destination code had been erased, replaced by static symbols. Ray felt anger stir inside him, not just because of the lies, but because someone had tried to cover the truth, and whoever it was had enough power to hide it from both sides. Lyra remained calm on the outside, but he could feel her pain rising beneath her steady voice. Her hands clenched just slightly, her breath shortened as she read each new page of hidden data. Despite the risk, Ray used his clearance level to dig deeper. He bypassed several security locks and found a trace of the missing logs. They pointed to a section of the station that was currently sealed for maintenance, an area not listed on the summit maps. Lyra recognized the code sequence. It matched the ones used by her people for emergency shelters, temporary containment zones, hidden for secrecy or survival. They decided to investigate, but before they could move further, the lights in the chamber flickered. Then alarms pulsed through the station, not loud, but sharp enough to signal that someone somewhere had noticed something unusual. Ray's heart raced, not from fear for himself, but for her. If she was discovered, she would be hunted, questioned, possibly worse, and he could not let that happen. He turned to her, eyes steady, told her to trust him, told her they had to move now, and she did not hesitate. Her cloak activated, but not fully, just enough to bend light, not enough to erase her completely. She stayed close beside him as they slipped through back corridors toward the hidden sector, where answers waited in the dark. Ray moved quickly through the dim corridor, his footsteps silent against the metal floor, his heart steady but his mind alert. Beside him, Lyra remained cloaked, her presence only a soft ripple in the air, her breathing calm, her senses sharp, both of them focused on reaching the restricted wing that had been sealed since the beginning of the summit, a place buried beneath excuses of repairs and safety regulations, but now exposed as something more. They reached the access hatch leading into the sealed zone, and Ray pulled a small device from his jacket. Its screen flickered faintly as he bypassed the lock with careful Fingers lines of code streamed across the display, and after a short pause the hatch hissed open, revealing a narrow tunnel lit only by emergency strips along the floor. They stepped inside. Without hesitation, the door sealed behind them, swallowing them in shadows and silence. They moved deeper. The air felt different. Colder, heavier. The hum of the station faded and was replaced by a subtle static, like the feeling of walking through a storm that had yet to break. Lyra slowed her steps, her cloak pulsing faintly as it adjusted to the new environment. She could feel energy sources scattered around, hidden but alive, and she knew they were not alone in this forgotten part of the station. They passed old supply crates, rusted cables, broken screens, the signs of a section long neglected or purposely abandoned. Then they reached a heavy door marked with no symbols, no warnings, only silence. Ray placed his hand on the panel beside it, and the wall responded, not with noise, but with resistance, as if trying to stop them from moving forward. But after a long moment, it opened, revealing a small room beyond it. The chamber was dim and lined with containment pods, each one closed, each one pulsing faintly with power. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. She recognized the design. They were shiver units meant for long sleep, meant to preserve bodies during travel or medical stasis. Her fingers trembled as she moved closer, her gaze scanning each pod until she found one with a broken seal and an empty chamber. Ray joined her, studying the data logs beside the pod. They were corrupted but not completely erased. He found enough to read one name, a name that matched the identifier Lyra had whispered so many times since they first met. Her brother had been here. He had been held inside this pod for reasons no one had explained. And now he was gone, moved again, or released into the void. Lyra stepped back, her breath unsteady for the first time since Ray had met her. Her control faltered, but only for a second. She turned, her face sharp, her voice low. Something is wrong here. This was not just a holding area. This was a transfer point, a place used to move captives. Without leaving a trace, she reached for the nearby console, activated a manual override, and more files began to appear. Security logs, sealed messages, internal alerts sent between unknown officers, warning of an incoming threat, not from outside, but from within the summit itself. Ray read the warnings. Slowly they mentioned a group posing as diplomats, a faction within one of the alien delegations, planning to disrupt the summit using energy surges placed near the fusion cores. He realized then that the sabotage was already in motion, carefully timed to strike during the final negotiation session, which would take place in less than one cycle from now. The damage would cripple the station, kill delegates, and ignite war between the species, blaming each other while the true enemy disappeared. They had no time left. Lyra turned to Ray, and without speaking they knew what had to be done. They had to reach the core and shut down the trigger before the damage was done, and they had to do it without alerting those already watching them from the shadows. Ray led the way, using access codes and hidden paths. From his time working on the station, Lyra followed with her cloak now fully activated, guiding him around cameras and patrols that had suddenly increased without warning. As they neared the central core chamber, they heard voices not far ahead, not human, not shiver, but a third language, one used only in encrypted communications. They stopped behind a support pillar and listened, catching fragments of the plan. The enemy agents were adjusting their schedule, speeding it up, preparing to detonate the surges within the next hour before the summit could close. Ray looked at Lyra, his voice low. "We split up. I distract them. You stop the surge." Her eyes narrowed for a moment. Then she nodded, understanding that there was no other way. He moved fast, drawing attention away, leading the enemy down a different hall. Using tricks and shadows, Lyra slipped into the control center and immediately began to work. The core was massive, pulsing with light and heat, surrounded by layered panels that shifted and spun with each second. She moved quickly, her fingers dancing across the controls as she searched for the activation points. They were buried deep inside false systems, but she had studied enough human code to know where to look, and after long moments, she found the pulse triggers ready, and counting down, she disabled the first two systems without trouble. But the last one resisted. The code fought back, sending a warning to the outer ring. Ray heard the alarm and knew what it meant. They had found her. He turned back, running against the wind of rising pressure inside the station, calling her name through the comms. She answered once, barely a whisper, saying, "Almost done, almost there. Hold them back just one more second." She finished it. The countdown froze, the surge lines dimmed, the core stabilized. But just as she stood to leave, the chamber door burst open, and guards poured in, weapons raised, eyes wide with shock as they saw what had been uncovered. Arrived seconds later, standing between her and the line of soldiers, his arms outstretched, his voice firm, telling them that she had saved the station. That without her the summit would have ended in fire, he demanded. They listened, demanded they stop and think. But guns do not think, they only wait for orders. In that moment, the future hung in silence, balanced on the choice of whether to trust or to destroy, whether to believe one man's words and one alien girl's actions, or to fall back into fear and hatred. And as that moment stretched into the stillness, something shifted. The station command responded not with bullets, but with a voice, telling everyone to stand down, that proof had been found, that files had been reviewed, and orders were being rewritten. Even now, the danger had passed for now, but the cost of what came next had yet to be seen. Chamber had fallen silent. The lights above flickered once, then steadied, casting long shadows across the faces of those who had gathered. The guards lowered their weapons, not because they had been ordered to fire, but because something in Ray's voice had reached them, something in his words carried weight that could not be ignored. And behind him, Lyra stood tall, no longer hiding behind her cloak, no longer just a shadow moving through the station, but a figure clear and present for all to see. The command director arrived moments later, her steps sharp, her expression unreadable. She looked from Ray to Lyra, then at the console behind them where the sabotage had been stopped seconds before detonation. Her voice was quiet, but firm, asking for explanation, asking for truth. Ray did not hesitate. He told them everything, how he had sensed Lyra, how he followed her path, how he learned of her purpose, and chose to trust instead of report. He told them about her search for her brother, about the hidden prisoner logs, about the secret group that planned to break the summit from within, and how Lyra had helped him stop it when no one else even knew it was happening. Room listened, some with suspicion, some with doubt, but most with silent respect, because deep down they knew something had gone wrong with this summit. And now the truth stood in front of them, not in polished words, not in diplomatic smiles, but in two individuals from opposite worlds who had done what no alliance could. They had acted with courage and with reason when others had only followed orders. A decision had to be made. Lyra had broken protocol, entered forbiddens areas, moved unseen through critical systems, and violated security on every level. But she had also saved the lives of every delegate aboard, exposed a hidden threat, and proven that trust could exist even in silence, even between enemies. Command Director took a long moment before speaking. Her decision surprised many, but not Ray and not Lyra. She declared that Lyra would not be detained, that charges would not be pressed. Instead, the Shiver delegation would be contacted for discussion, and the findings of this event would be shared with full transparency. But there was a problem. The Shiver ship that had arrived earlier had already departed. Without warning, their message cold and distant, saying the mission had failed and the operative had gone missing. Declared presumed lost. Lyra remained silent as she listened, her face calm. But Ray saw the pain behind her eyes. Her own people had abandoned her, refused to believe the truth, or perhaps feared the fallout too much to face it. Her hands rested at her sides, steady but heavy with unspoken weight, and in that moment, she knew she could not go back to the life she once knew. The station offered her protection, a place to stay, while the councils reviewed the incident. Ray stood beside her, not as her guardian or shield, but as someone who had walked the same path, someone who had been unseen most of his life, until now. The two of them, no longer strangers, now partners, now bound by something neither of them had ever expected. Weeks past the summit ended with new agreements, stronger terms and deeper warnings. Security was increased across the borders, and investigations began to find the group responsible for the attempted sabotage. But the most unexpected result of all was not in the political changes or the restructured Protocols, it was in the silent partnership between a human who could see beyond the visible and an alien who no longer needed to hide. Lyra began working within the station's advanced analytics team, not as a guest or prisoner, but as a specialist. Her knowledge of cloaking systems and energy mapping proved valuable, and her insight into other species' behavior helped prevent future threats. She wore no uniform, no badge, but her presence was known, and her actions spoke louder than any title ever could. Ray returned to his station post, but his world had changed. He no longer walked alone, no longer drifted through corridors. Unseen, his abilities were now respected and understood, not just as talent, but as a gift that had saved lives. His connection with Lyra grew not just through shared silence, but through trust, through slow conversations, through work that mattered, and through the unspoken truth that they had seen each other clearly when no one else had. Sometimes late at night they stood at the highest viewing platform, watching the star burn slowly in the distance, its fading light a reminder of how fragile everything could be around them. The station hummed with life. Below, lights blinking, voices moving, air shifting, but in that quiet space the noise faded, and all that remained was understanding. Lyra spoke less than most, but her words were careful and honest. She told Ray one evening that she had once believed her people were the only ones who understood how to survive, how to watch without being watched. But now she knew that seeing was more than just using eyes. It was about choosing to understand, to wait, to listen. And Ray had shown her that not through weapons or warnings, but through stillness, through patience, through one human who refused to look away. Ray smiled then, not because he felt proud or victorious, but because in that moment he knew he had not just helped someone, he had found someone who saw the world as he did, through layers, through currents, through paths that others missed. And together, they were no longer hidden, no longer invisible. They were a team built not from the same world, but from the same truth. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread across the stars about the incident. Some called it luck, some called it a miracle, but those who knew the real story spoke of a human who could see through cloaks and an alien girl who chose to step into the open, and in a galaxy where war often followed, misunderstanding their story became something rare. It became a reason to hope. The end.